So here's a thing I only found out recently, and it's been rattling around my head ever since. When Ben Bocquelet was putting the Amazing World of Gumball together, he didn't design most of those characters for a cartoon at all. They were rejects, bits and pieces he'd drawn for advertising work that never got used. A folder of things nobody wanted, and rather than bin them, he stuck them all in one school and called it a show, which is a lovely story on its own. But then that same show went on to invent an entire dimension where the universe throws away the things it's decided are mistakes. And as far as I can tell, nobody involved ever stopped and went, hang on, that's roughly the territory we're in tonight. 12 theories about Gumball. Some of them are fan-made, some of them are things the show has flat out confirmed on screen. And I'll tell you which is which as we go, because honestly, the canon stuff is stranger. If you're enjoying this sort of thing, there's a subscribe button somewhere. No pressure. Let's get into it. The first thing you notice about the void is that it looks like a dead channel. Not a black emptiness, not a swirling purple wormhole, not any of the usual visual shorthand for somewhere that isn't here. It's television static. Grey and white noise, the exact texture you'd get on an old CRT set at 3 in the morning when the broadcast had finished, and nobody had bothered to turn the thing off. And floating in it, drifting past at no particular speed, is stuff. Actual physical objects, tumbling through the static like debris in low gravity. I want to spend a bit of time on what that stuff is because the choices are very deliberate, and they tell you a lot. There are pogo balls, laser discs, cassette tapes, jorts, which I had to look up and which are, disappointingly, just denim shorts. There's the mullet, rendered as an object rather than a haircut, which I have no notes on because that's exactly correct. Disco is in there. Mr. Small's airbrushed hippie van is in there, which becomes relevant later in a way I won't spoil yet. And there's a frog that is very obviously meant to be Crazy Frog without being legally Crazy Frog. So the void is a landfill for dead trends. Fine. Funny. That's a solid 5 seconds of visual gag for the adults watching with their kids. Except it isn't only trends, there are also people in there. The episode that introduces all this is called The Void, from the 3rd season, and the setup is deceptively ordinary. A girl from Elmore Junior High has gone missing. Gumball, Darwin and Mr. Small, the school counsellor, who I'll come back to at some point because he's his own separate mystery, go looking for her. And what they find is that she hasn't run away, hasn't been taken, hasn't had anything happen to her in the way we normally mean that word. The world decided she was a mistake, and the world removed her. That's the mechanism. Not a villain, not a curse, not a monster with a plan. The universe of Elmore has some kind of ongoing quality control process, and if you fail it, you go into the static. And I think the reason this lands, as hard as it does, is the total absence of anyone to be angry at. Most of what we call horror gives you a face. There's a thing doing the bad thing, and even if you can't beat it, you can at least point at it. The void gives you nothing to point at. Gumball, Darwin and Mr. Small all talk about it as though the decision was made by the world itself, which is a very strange sentence to put in the mouth of a 12-year-old cartoon cat. Nobody in the episode ever asks who's running it. It doesn't seem to occur to them that there'd be a who, sort of like how nobody asks who decides what the weather's going to be. It just does what it does, and you get on with your day. Now, the physical rules inside the place are worth going through, because they're specific enough that somebody clearly sat down and thought about them. The laws of physics don't work properly in there. That's stated. Things drift rather than fall, and the geography is made up of these chunks of rock and floating islands with no visible support, so you get this odd sense of a landscape that's been broken up and left where it landed. But the detail that gets me is what happens to people specifically. When a person ends up in the void, they can freeze. Not die, not vanish. Freeze. Held in place mid-motion, exactly like a paused video. Whatever they were doing at the moment, the world let go of them. They're still doing, indefinitely, with no awareness of the time passing, and you can break them out of it just by touching them. That's it, that's the whole method. No ritual, no key, no clever solution. Someone has to walk over and put a hand on you, and you start again from wherever you stopped. Which means the only thing standing between a paused person and forever is whether anybody comes looking. Nobody in Elmore knows the void exists. Nobody would think to look. So the actual survival condition here is somebody accidentally stumbling into a dimension they've never heard of and happening to brush past you. I find that a genuinely rough thing to sit with. Not scary exactly, just bleak in a very specific and quiet way. Here's a fun detail that makes it worse, and I promise I'm not doing this on purpose. The void doesn't only hold discontinued people and dead fads, it also holds prototypes, early versions of things that got redesigned. And among the debris, if you're the sort of person who freeze frames a cartoon, you can spot an old prototype design of the Watterson house itself. So the family home has a discarded draft floating around in the static. An earlier attempt at the place where our main characters live, thrown out and filed alongside the mullet. I think about that one a lot. Now this is a Cartoon Network show. I want to keep saying that, because the register of the thing is so completely at odds with what it's actually describing. This is a program aimed at children, and its third season introduced a metaphysical rubbish tip where the universe quietly disposes of anyone it's grown bored of. And it plays a fair chunk of that for laughs. The jokes are good, the pacing is quick, there's a bit where they're racing to get out before the exit seals, and it's genuinely tense in the way a good adventure episode is tense. But the concept underneath doesn't stop being what it is just because the delivery is light. There's a fan reading I've always liked here, and it's speculation rather than anything the show confirms, so take it as such. The idea is that the void isn't a punishment at all. It's maintenance. Elmore is a world with an absurd amount of stuff in it. Every species you can think of, every art style, characters made of paper and balloons and bricks and clouds, and a world that chaotic would need some kind of pruning mechanism just to stay coherent. The void isn't cruel, it's housekeeping. The tragedy is only that housekeeping doesn't distinguish between an obsolete fad and a person, because from the system's point of view, there isn't a distinction to make. I don't fully buy it, but I can't argue with it either, which is usually the sign of a decent theory. What I do think is fair to say is that the show never gives you a comforting version. There's no episode where somebody discovers the void's rules and figures out how to switch it off. There's no authority to appeal to. The nearest thing to a defense anybody in Elmore has is being interesting enough that the world doesn't get around to them. And that, as a rule for existing, is a horrible thing to hand to a 12-year-old. One last thing, because it's the bit that reframes everything else. When Gumball and Darwin and Mr. Small come back out, and they do come back out, this isn't a tragedy of an episode. Their memories of the whole thing get wiped. Not partially, not fuzzily. They walk away from the single, most significant discovery anyone in that town has ever made. And by the end of the day, it's gone. So the world removes people, and then removes the knowledge that it removes people. Which means whatever's running, this is not passive. Something is actively protecting the process. Not defending it, not justifying it. Just making sure nobody's carrying the memory around where it might turn into a question. There's an old joke on TV tropes that the L in Elmore is short for Eldritch. I laughed the first time I read it and then thought about it for slightly too long. But now, let's talk a little about the girl they went in there to find, because she's the reason any of this got discovered in the first place. And what happened to her is somehow more unsettling than the place itself. Molly Collins is a grey sauropod, a little long-necked dinosaur girl with a pleasant face and absolutely nothing else going on. That's not me being unkind, that's the plot. She turns up in the first season as one of the classroom crowd, and if you weren't specifically looking for her, you'd never notice she was there. She stands where extras stand. She reacts when extras react. She's part of that wallpaper of background students that every school set cartoon needs, so the room doesn't look empty. And at some point in the show's run, without any fuss or announcement, she stopped appearing, which happens constantly in animation. Characters get quietly retired all the time. A designer moves on, a writer forgets they exist, the storyboard doesn't have room, and they just fade out of the rotation. Nobody comments, nobody notices. That's the normal, boring, industrial reality of making a television program for 8 years. What Gumball did was take that entirely mundane production fact and make it canon. In the episode, Molly hasn't moved schools or gone on holiday. The world has judged her uninteresting, and on that basis it has removed her from reality. That's the whole of it. And here's the part that I think is actually the cleverest and nastiest bit of writing in the whole thing. The removal isn't just physical. Everyone forgets her. Instantly. Not a gradual fading, not a where's what's her name moment. She's gone from every head in Elmore at the same moment she goes from the room. So the crime is being unmemorable, and the sentence is being unmemorable, permanently, everywhere, at once. That's such an elegantly horrible piece of logic that I sort of have to applaud it. Now the way she gets found is almost incidental. There's a paper trail, a leftover, an inconsistency, some small administrative crumb that shouldn't exist if she never did. And Mr. Small, of all people, is the one who takes it seriously. The school counsellor, the hippie, the one character in Elmore who's treated by everybody as an absolute crank. I want to sit on that for a second, because it's a pattern in this show that keeps repeating, and I'll come back to it more than once tonight. Elmore has a fairly consistent habit of putting the truth in the mouth of the person nobody listens to. It's not subtle when you spot it. The counsellor with the crystals is right. The town treats him as a joke anyway. Anyway, they go in, they find her, they get her out. Good ending. Except her memory of the void gets erased on the way out. She doesn't come back knowing what happened to her. She doesn't come back with a warning to give anyone. As far as Molly Collins is concerned, nothing occurred. She was in class, and then she was in class, and the gap in the middle is not a gap because there's nothing in her head to mark it as one. And here's the thing that follows from that, which the episode is content to leave lying on the floor for you to pick up. Nothing has changed. The mechanism that decided she was surplus is still running. The criteria haven't been adjusted. She hasn't been made more interesting. She's been retrieved from the bin and put back on the shelf. Still boring in a world that has already demonstrated exactly what it does with boring. Nobody in Elmore is watching the situation. Nobody can. They don't remember. So the rescue isn't a solution. It's a delay. This is where the fan theory comes in, and I think it's one of the more grimly plausible ones going. The reading is that Elmore is running a permanent, silent cull of its own population, sorted by relevance, and Molly is not the exception. She's just the one they happen to catch. Follow the arithmetic on that for a moment. Elmore Junior High has a classroom full of students. A fair few of them get whole episodes to themselves. Tobias, Banana Joe, Bober, Alan, Carmen, Penny, Carrie, Tina, Masami, and so on down the list. But behind those there's a second tier who exist as pure crowd, faces in a hallway. And beyond that there's a third tier who are functionally shapes. If the world removes people for being irrelevant, and the population contains a large and continuously replenished supply of irrelevant people, then Elmore has been leaking residents for its entire history, and nobody's noticed because noticing is precisely the thing the process prevents. It's a closed loop, and it's airtight, which is why I like it. There's a slightly gentler version of the same theory that I'm marginally more fond of, purely because it's sadder. In that reading, the void doesn't hunt anybody. It's passive. It's more like a drain, and things only go down it when nothing's holding them in place. What holds you in place is other people's attention. So being forgotten doesn't get you sent to the void. Being forgotten is the same event as going to the void, described from the other side. Which would mean the rescue worked exactly as well as it did because 3 people were, for a few hours, thinking very hard about Molly Collins. I don't know. I find that one strangely comforting and strangely awful at the same time, which I suppose is the correct response to most things in this show. And here's the thing that makes the whole thing click for me. The reason this episode exists is that the writers noticed they'd stopped using her. That's it. That's the origin. A character had drifted out of the show through nothing more sinister than production drift. And rather than let it lie, somebody in that room said, "What if we made that a thing that happened to her?" So the episode is a group of professional writers looking directly at their own behaviour, deciding it's monstrous, and building a monster out of it. And they didn't stop there. Because the thing about writing an episode where the universe deletes a character for being underused is that you've now got a mechanism, and mechanisms want to be used again. Which brings me to what I think is the single best piece of long-form storytelling this show ever pulled off. Because Molly wasn't alone down there. While Gumball and Darwin were tearing through the static looking for a girl they'd barely spoken to, there was somebody else in that dimension. Somebody who saw them. Somebody who shouted. They didn't hear him. And he never, ever got over it. Rob, my name is Rob. He has to say it like that twice in one of his early appearances because the 2 boys standing in front of him have known him for years and cannot come up with his name. And the joke works. It's a good joke. A background kid getting increasingly upset that the leads don't know who he is, that's a solid bit, and the show plays it lightly. Then the show goes back to it about a season later and turns it into the spine of everything. Rob in the first couple of seasons is a blue cyclops. Lanky, one big pink eye, greasy auburn hair, yellow shirt with orange sleeves, brown backpack. He's rendered in CGI, which in a show where the animation style changes every 4 seconds isn't remarkable in itself. He's in classrooms, he's in corridors. He is, by any measure you'd care to apply, filler. And then he isn't anywhere, and nobody notices because that's how this works. He was in the void the whole time. During the rescue we just talked about, he was there. And he saw them. He saw Gumball and Darwin and Mr. Small come through. And he did the only sensible thing a person in that situation could do, which was shout for help. They didn't hear him. They were busy. They had a girl to find, and a closing exit to beat, and a van to get back to. And a voice calling from somewhere off to the side did not register as information. So he got himself out. And the way he did it is the detail that makes the whole character work. Mr. Small drives a van. She's called Janice, she's airbrushed in that specific late 60s way, and she is the vehicle they'd taken into the static in the first place. When Janice launched back toward Elmore, Rob grabbed the back of her and held on. He made it out, but the void didn't let go cleanly. Something in the process of leaving, whether the dimension was pulling him back or trying to finish erasing him, the show doesn't say, took his body apart on the way through. He arrives in Elmore glitching. His head is a lopsided polygonal mess with panels of raw static crawling across it. His limbs flicker. He looks like a corrupted file because that's essentially what he is. And on top of that, he's lost his memory. He doesn't know his name, doesn't know where he lived, doesn't know what he's for. Where he ends up is the Wattersons' basement, living down there, not doing anything particularly, just existing in the one place in Elmore that nobody visits. And when the family finally finds him, what he says is the line that the rest of the series is built on. That he's a nobody, that there's no place for him in this world, that he is nothing, and he has no reason to exist. He's not being dramatic. In this universe, that's a diagnosis. Now the next part is one people tend to skim past, so I want to lay it out slowly. Gumball and Darwin try to help, sincerely. They're not being cruel here. Their reasoning is that if the problem is not having a role, then the fix is to find him one. So they go through the available options, and every good role in Elmore is taken. There's already a bully. There's already a nerd, a jock, a teacher's pet, a cool kid. The town is fully staffed, so running out of ideas, they suggest he could be their mortal enemy. They tell him to go and be the worst guy the world has ever made. They say this the way you'd suggest someone take up badminton, and it fixes him. The moment the roll lands, his memory comes back. His identity comes back. He remembers the void, remembers shouting, remembers the two of them not looking round. And he swears he'll take away everything they love. But the crucial bit, the bit he actually says out loud, is that they've finally given him a part to play in the world. That's gratitude. Buried under the threat, that's a thank you. Which brings us to the theory, and this one is genuinely load-bearing for how you read the entire series. The idea is that in Elmore, villainy isn't a moral choice. It's a survival strategy. Rob didn't become evil because something in him turned. He became evil because being a villain is a job with a defined function, and a defined function is the only thing that keeps you out of the static. He's not a bad person. He's a person who did the paperwork. And once you're carrying that idea, a lot of the show reorganizes itself around it. Because if relevance is what holds you in place, then every character in Elmore is, at some level, performing. Tobias is aggressively, exhaustingly Tobias at all times. Banana Joe never stops doing banana material. Tina is a threat in every scene she's in. These aren't personalities so much as they are load-bearing gimmicks, and the show is very funny about how hard everybody works to maintain them. I don't think it's a coincidence that the one character who tried to give up his gimmick is the one who nearly died of it. There's an episode where Rob decides villainy isn't working out for him. He's not good at it, his traps fail, his schemes collapse, and he's ready to pack it in and go back to being nobody in particular, genuinely at peace with it, from what I remember. And it's Gumball and Darwin wandering around town irritating him, who wind him back up until he recommits. They keep pushing him back onto the stage. Every time. I've seen people read that as the boys being callous, and I don't think that's it. I think they're the only two people in Elmore who ever look directly at him, and their attention is the thing keeping him solid. It's an awful, codependent little arrangement, and neither of them has the vocabulary to notice it's happening. Here's a detail I love, which is entirely a production thing, but works beautifully in universe. For a stretch of the series, Rob gets a supervillain rebrand. He's renamed Dr. Wrecker, on the grounds that Rob is not a threatening name, which, fair. And for that persona, the show brought in David Warner. Actual David Warner. The voice from Tron from Time Bandits, from about 4 decades of very good screen villainy. So a character whose entire existence is a plea to be taken seriously briefly gets one of the great villain voices in the business. And he still doesn't win. He never wins. That's the shape of him. I said at the top of the video that I'd flag what's canon and what's fan invention, and I should be straight with you here. Almost all of that is on screen. The void, the shouting, the disfigurement, the basement, the role, the gratitude. The only genuinely speculative part is the reading that villainy is a survival mechanism, rather than a character turn. And even that one the show has been edging toward for years. But there's one more thing about Rob, and it's the piece that takes this from a sad story about a forgotten kid to something considerably weirder. Because at some point after all this, Rob works out where he is. And I don't mean geographically. There's a scene in a recent episode where Gumball walks into his own house to prove a point to Darwin. And the point is that the upstairs window doesn't match the inside. That's the whole complaint. The window you can see from the front garden does not correspond to any room that exists in there. And rather than shrugging at it, the way you or I would shrug at a bit of dodgy architecture, the two of them start listing other things. They haven't had a birthday in 7 years. Their voices changed. Not broke, changed. Different voices out of nowhere. And everyone carried on as though that were normal. Their bodies were redrawn between the first and second seasons. The proportions moved, the lines got cleaner, and nobody said anything. I want to be precise about what's happening in that scene, because it's easy to file it as a fourth wall gag and move on. It isn't a gag. The characters aren't winking at the camera. They're standing in their own hallway, comparing notes, and slowly working out that the rules of their world do not hold together. They're doing what you do. Now, Rob got there years earlier. He's been aware that his world is fiction since about the 4th season, and I've always found the specific shape of his grievance more interesting than the fact of it. He doesn't hate Gumball for anything Gumball did. Not really. The abandonment in the static is the origin, sure, but it isn't the thing that keeps him going. What actually eats at him is that Gumball is the protagonist. That's it. That's the offense. One of them is at the center of the frame, and one of them was in the background, and that arrangement was decided somewhere Rob has never been by people he'll never meet. You can't appeal a casting decision. There's nobody to write to, so Rob spends his time trying to displace Gumball. Not kill him, most of the time. Displace him. Seal him in the void and take his place at the center of the universe, which is either the pettiest villain motivation in television or the most rational one, depending on how you feel about your own life. I lean rational, personally. If you found out the reason nothing ever goes your way is that you were written as a minor character, I don't think you'd take it especially well either. Right, now the part that I genuinely did not expect the show to commit to. In the revival, they made the rule explicit, and the rule is this: if anyone living in Elmore discovers that their world is fictional, the void takes everyone. Not the person who found out. Everyone. The whole town. The whole world. Awareness is the apocalypse condition. And I need you to hold that next to the scene I opened this bit with, because they happen in the same episode. Gumball and Darwin are standing in their hallway, counting up the inconsistencies, cheerfully doing detective work. And what they are actually doing, without any idea of it, is walking their entire species toward a cliff edge. The episode is a chase, but it's a chase where the thing pursuing them is the truth, and the person trying to stop them is Rob. That's the flip. That's the thing I keep turning over. Rob, the nemesis, the one who spent years trying to take everything from them, spends this episode working flat out to keep Gumball ignorant. Because a Gumball who understands is a Gumball who ends the world, and Rob, whatever else he is, lives here. There's a version of this that's just a neat structural gag, and I'd have accepted that. But the show plays it straighter than it needed to. Rob isn't smug about it. He's stressed. He's doing a job he didn't ask for, protecting people who've never once been kind to him, from a piece of information that he has to carry personally because nobody else can be trusted with it. I said a bit ago that he found a role. This is the role now. Not villain, custodian. And here's a fun detail about how they actually pull it off in the episode, because the mechanics are lovely. Rob doesn't stop the boys by force. He gets hold of the script, the literal screenplay of the episode he's currently in, which he then starts rewriting mid-scene to keep them away from the school. It goes badly, mostly because his collaborator is careless. He writes the phrase, "and stuff," and the words physically appear in the town. He writes that the boys can't avoid a sale at the mall, despite them being nowhere near the mall, so the mall comes to them and chases them around. Every clumsy edit makes the world less coherent, which makes the boys more suspicious, which sends them faster toward the exact thing they mustn't find. The harder he works to hide the seams, the more visible the seams get, which as a description of trying to keep a secret is about as accurate as it gets. There's one more piece of that episode I have to mention because I still don't quite believe it exists. At one point the rewrite is halted by broadcast standards and practices. The censors, as a character in the episode. Rejecting Rob's script changes on content grounds, which is why one of his more drastic solutions doesn't go through. Somebody wrote a scene where the network's compliance department intervenes in the plot as a physical entity, and it aired. Now theories? There are a few running around this and they're all fan side, so treat them accordingly. The first is the tidy one. that the void isn't a place at all, it's cancellation. Not a metaphor for cancellation, the thing itself, seen from inside. When a show ends, its world stops. Everything in it becomes, in the most literal sense, obsolete, which is precisely the qualifying condition for the static. Under that reading, the void hasn't been hunting anybody. It's been waiting. The second is stranger, and I've got a soft spot for it. It's that the memory wipes we've talked about aren't hostile at all, they're mercy. The world isn't hiding the truth to protect itself. It's hiding the truth to protect the people in it, because a population that knows it's fictional is a population that stops functioning, and a world that stops functioning gets binned. Under that reading, the forgetting is kindness with terrible implications, which is a very Gumball sort of idea. And the third, which is less a theory and more a thing people have noticed. Nobody in that town has ever asked why they don't get older. Not once, not seriously. The boys will happily interrogate a wrong-facing window, and the fact that none of them have had a birthday in 7 years goes on the list as an item of trivia rather than the central horror of their existence, which might be the strongest evidence for any of it. Because you'd ask, wouldn't you? And on the subject of things people notice and then don't act on, there is somebody in Elmore who has been painting the end of the world for years, publicly, in the open, with a fairly consistent hit rate. Banana Barbara is Banana Joe's mum, and she is unavoidably a banana. I mention that not to be flippant, but because it's genuinely relevant to how the town treats her. Elmore is full of people, made of unlikely materials, and it's never an issue, but Barbara occupies a specific social position, and it's the position of the person you're gentle with. She's presented as scattered, fragile, a bit adrift. Her family are patient with her in the way families are patient with someone they've decided isn't quite reliable. And she paints, that's her thing. She's an artist, and her paintings are the kind of thing that gets described as expressive, which is usually what people say when they mean they don't know what they're looking at. Here's what she's been painting. Static, floating rock, Elmore coming apart, the Watterson family running through a landscape of grey and white noise. She has produced multiple pieces depicting the void, in detail, repeatedly. And she has never been there. That's not a fan inference. That's the situation the show sets up. Barbara has no route to that information. She wasn't on the rescue, she has no relationship with anybody who was, and the people who were had their memories scrubbed anyway. There is no chain of custody by which she could have heard about it. She simply knows what it looks like. The episodes that lean into this most are The Oracle and The Future, and I'd point anybody toward the first one particularly, because it does something quite sly. It sets up her prophetic ability as a gag. The paintings come true, that's funny. Let's watch the family try to game it. And then it doesn't take the gag back at the end. It just leaves the capability lying there, established, unexplained, and largely unexamined for the rest of the series. Now, the final shot of the original show's last episode is Rob falling into the static as the school comes apart around him. Barbara painted that earlier. It's the same image. I remember the first time somebody pointed that out to me, and my honest reaction was to assume they were overreading a coincidence, because fandoms do that constantly, and I'm as skeptical as the next person. It's not a coincidence. The composition matches. The show did it on purpose and expected you to catch it. So Elmore contains a functioning oracle, confirmed on screen with a verified hit on the largest event in the series' history, and nothing is ever done about it. That's the part I actually want to spend time on, because I think the interesting reading here isn't about her at all. It's about everybody else. Here's a person telling a town, in the clearest medium available to her, exactly what is going to happen to them. And the town's response is to file her under eccentric and carry on. Not cruelly, nobody's mean to Barbara particularly. She's just been sorted into a category, the category of person whose statements don't require follow-up, and once you're in that category, the content of what you say stops mattering. You could be right about everything, and it wouldn't change your classification. I don't think you need me to draw the parallel. It's not a subtle one, and it's not unique to cartoons. But I do think the show is doing something slightly more pointed than the standard nobody believes the prophet routine, and it's this. Barbara isn't ignored because her warnings are cryptic. That's the usual dodge. Normally the prophet speaks in riddles and everyone gets a pass for not decoding them in time. Barbara paints pictures of the thing. That happens. The information is as legible as information gets. The failure isn't in the transmission. It's entirely on the receiving end. There's a fan theory attached to this that I want to handle carefully, because it edges into territory where you can be flippant about things that deserve better. The theory is that Barbara's condition and her ability aren't two separate facts, that whatever makes her seem unreliable to Elmore is the same thing that lets her see past the edges of it, that she's not a scattered woman who happens to be psychic. She's someone whose grip on the agreed-upon version of reality is loose enough that she can see what the agreed-upon version is covering up. I think that's a genuinely interesting idea, and I also think it's the sort of idea that gets ugly fast if you handle it badly. So let me put my own view in plainly. The version I find worth anything is the one that's sympathetic to her. She's not a device. She's a person carrying information nobody will take off her hands in a house full of people who love her and don't believe her. And that's a lonely thing to be, regardless of whether the information is correct. And it is correct. That's the bit that gets me. She's right. And being right has bought her precisely nothing. And this is one of my favourite things in the whole show. Rob, who at that point in the series is nominally the villain, is the one who takes her seriously. He's the only one. The disfigured background kid from the static is the sole resident of Elmore, who looks at those paintings and thinks, right, that's data. He goes to her work specifically to learn what's coming. Not to mock it, not to steal it, to study it. So the two characters the town has written off, the one it deleted and the one it patronises, are the only two with an accurate picture of what's about to happen. I don't know how much of that is deliberate design and how much is the natural result of a writer's room following a good idea downhill for a few years. Either way, it's a hell of a structure to find sitting inside a Cartoon Network sitcom. One last thought on Barbara, and this one's mine, rather than anybody else's, so weight it accordingly. Everything else in this show gets its explanation eventually. The static gets rules, Rob gets a backstory, the plot holes get a cause. This programme is unusually diligent about closing its own loops, more diligent than it has any commercial reason to be. Barbara's ability has never been explained. Where it comes from, why she has it, whether anyone else could, nothing. It's the one supernatural fact in the series that just sits there being true. And I've come round to thinking that's the right call, because an explained oracle is a mechanism, and a mechanism can be argued with, or switched off, or exploited. An unexplained one is just a woman in a house who knows, and can't make anybody else know, and has to get on with her day anyway. That's worse. And it's better writing. Anyway, let's talk about the day the thing in the paintings actually arrived, because it happened, and it happened on a Monday evening in June, and then the show stopped. The last episode of the original run went out on the 24th of June, 2019. It's called The Inquisition, and it is the 240th episode of the show. It opens with Principal Brown running through the corridors of Elmore Junior High in an absolute state, bursting into the staff room to tell the other teachers that the superintendent is coming, which, as cold opens go, is about as ordinary as this programme gets. School inspection. Everyone panics. We've all seen that episode of something. Then the superintendent arrives, and he's a live-action human being, not a drawing of a human, not a stylised one, a photographed man composited into the animation, standing in an auditorium full of cartoons and addressing them from a lectern. His name is Superintendent Evil, which the show does not apologise for, and his stated intention is to eliminate the cartoonish and nonsensical elements of the school. And then he starts doing it. Terry gets her face erased. Terry, for anyone who doesn't know, is a paper cutout, a sheet of paper with a drawn-on face and a lot of anxiety. So removing the face removes the entire person while leaving the body standing there. Alan is a balloon, and a balloon is just a head. So evil gives him a body, which is somehow more disturbing than taking one away. The students get converted one at a time, rendered into live-action humans, photographic skin, real hair, actual eyes. I've watched a lot of animation do a lot of unsettling things, and I'm not sure I've seen anything land quite like this. Because the horror isn't gore and it isn't threat, it's correction. It's a thing being made normal against its will, and the show understands exactly why that reads as violence. There's a moment where Gumball, now human, kisses a blonde girl with pigtails on the assumption that she's Penny. It's not Penny. Penny came out of the process as a redhead. He's kissed Sarah, who is delighted, while Penny watches, who is not. It's played as farce, and it works as farce, and underneath it there's this quiet, awful implication that they've all been made unrecognisable to each other. They win in the end, sort of. They get themselves back, and there's a scuffle where evil tries to leg it, slips on a banana skin, because of course he does, and the students crowd round and pull the face off. It's Rob. It was always Rob. And here's what he says once he wakes up alone at the school later that night, talking mostly to himself. They should have listened. The transformation was the only chance they had of escaping to the other place before this world. And that's as far as he gets because the void arrives. The floor of Elmore Junior High starts falling into static. Rob ends up hanging off a fragment of it by his fingers, and Gumball reaches for him, and the frame freezes. A little jingle plays, the kind that plays at the end of every episode, and that was the show, for 6 years. I want to lay out cleanly what that reveal actually does because it's a lot heavier than a twist. Everything Rob did in that episode was a rescue. The man he was pretending to be, the process he was running, the whole grotesque business of making them human, that was an evacuation. He'd seen what was coming, mostly through the paintings we talked about, and he'd worked out that the thing the static consumes is the cartoon. So if you stop being one, you might survive. And the students undid it. Of course they did. From where they were standing, a stranger was mutilating them. There was no version of that scene where they didn't fight back. So they defeated the only person, in Elmore, who knew what was happening, using the exact courage and solidarity you're supposed to admire in a children's show, and the immediate consequence was the end of their world. That's a bleak piece of construction, and I don't think it's accidental. The heroism is genuine and it's catastrophic, both at once. Very few shows will let those two things sit in the same scene without softening one of them. Now, the outside the show layer, which is where this gets properly strange. Gumball was not cancelled in the ordinary sense. Bockley had said years earlier that 6 seasons was it, and that it was his decision. But the ending, that specific ending, the freeze frame, the hand not quite reached, was not what he wanted. He said so publicly, on Twitter, a few weeks before it aired. He asked people to stop coming after him about it, said it wasn't his choice to land the last episode that way, and said that if the film happened, everything would land properly. The film did not happen. Not then. It was announced, greenlit, given a director, moved, shelved, revived, revised, and spent years in the kind of limbo that's difficult to describe without using the word void, which I'm going to avoid doing because it's too neat, and I don't trust neat. So, a show that spent 6 seasons building a monster out of the concept of cancellation ended on a cliffhanger. The creator didn't choose, and then sat unfinished for the better part of a decade, while its resolution was shopped between corporate owners. Fans noticed. Fans could hardly not notice. There's a piece I came across from a few years into that gap, arguing that the finale had turned out to be a prophecy, that the anxiety in it about live action swallowing animation, and about bland corporate normality being imposed on things that are strange and specific had aged into something uncomfortably accurate as the studios started pulling animated projects and leaning hard on live-action remakes. I'm generally allergic to the prediction genre. Most of it is people finding shapes in clouds, but I'll give this one more credit than usual. And here's why. The Inquisition isn't predicting anything. It's describing. The pressures it's about were already sitting in that building while it was being made. A man who worked in children's animation in the 2010s wrote an episode about a bloke in a suit arriving to make everything less weird. And then a bloke in a suit arrived. That's not clairvoyance. That's just knowing your industry. The last thing I'll say about this episode is the smallest one, and it's the reason I find it hard to shake. The final shot is Rob falling. It matches the painting, and there's a slightly earlier episode where Gumball drew that same image himself, Rob going into the static, as a bit of throwaway business. So the ending was on the wall, twice before it happened. Once by someone nobody believes, and once by the person it happened to, and neither of them could do a thing about it. Carrie is 327 years old. She says it herself, in passing, in an episode called The Drama. It's not a reveal. There's no music sting. It's stated the way you'd state your shoe size, and then the episode gets on with whatever it was doing. She's a ghost, white, translucent, no legs, a tail where the legs would be, hair over one eye, though not consistently the same eye, which I've always assumed is a joke about how much effort continuity requires. She wears a little skull bow. She's in Miss Simeon's class with everyone else, and she has been in that class, presumably, for a very long time. The name is Kruger, which is Freddie, and her first name is Carrie, which is Carrie. So the show has assembled her out of two of the most famous horror properties going, and then made her a slightly sardonic teenage girl who mostly wants to be left alone. That's a good joke, and I don't think enough people give it credit. Now, her origin, which is properly odd. Her father was a mortal man called Vladus Lokowiczki. He met a ghost. He met her in a mirror. I'll say that again because it deserves it. A living man fell in love with a woman who existed on the other side of a reflection, and their daughter was born a ghost. That's the canon. That's not fan speculation. That's what the episode establishes. And the show delivers it in about 90 seconds and then moves on, which is fairly typical. Here's the collection of facts that the theory's built out of, and I want to just lay them down one after another, because the accumulation is the point. Carrie doesn't appear in mirrors. Carrie doesn't appear in photographs. If you take a picture of a group and she's in it, she's not in it. In the drama, she gets around this by summoning a specific haunted camera capable of capturing her, which raises questions about where one obtains a haunted camera that the show declines to answer. And this is the one. In that same episode, it's established that Carrie continuously perceives ghosts and demons throughout Elmore that nobody else can see. Not occasionally, not in haunted locations. Throughout the town, all the time, she has never not been able to see them. Darwin is standing right there. He can't see any of it. So Elmore is layered. There's the version everyone lives in, and there's another population sharing the same streets. And one moderately bored teenager is the only functioning sensor in the entire municipality. And nobody has ever debriefed her. That's the theory, and I'd argue it's barely a theory. It's just the conclusion you reach if you take the show at its word. The speculative part is only in the scale, how many of them there are, what they're doing, whether they're aware they're being watched by the one person who can watch them. What I find genuinely funny about it, in a grim way, is Carrie's attitude. She's not distressed by any of this. She's not carrying it around as a burden. She's a bit fed up mostly. There's a Halloween episode where her entire arc is being irritated that the holiday's gone soft, that the monsters that used to terrify people have been reduced to marketing, and nobody's frightened of anything anymore. She's not scared of the demons. She thinks they've let themselves go. There's an episode called The Scam that I always come back to on this. Gumball invents a monster called Gargaroth for a school show and tell, makes the whole thing up, names it repeatedly, builds a whole bit of folklore about a creature banished to the underworld whose name mustn't be spoken, and then Gargaroth turns up. Because obviously he does. The made-up thing was real, or became real, and the distinction in Elmore is thinner than you'd want it to be. Carrie's in that episode, and she does the thing that tells you everything about her position in this world. She backs up Gumball's story, she confirms it, partly because she's in on the scam and there's sweets in it for her, but partly, I've always thought, because from where she's standing it wasn't a particularly wild claim. There's a moment in that same episode I think about disproportionately, often. Carrie has no body, she can't eat, and at one point she asks Darwin sheepishly, which is the word the wiki uses and the word I'd use, whether she can borrow his body to eat the sweets they've earned. She has to ask permission to taste something. There's a whole character in that one request, and the show gives it about 4 seconds. Now the darker fan reading, and I'll mark this clearly because it is entirely invented by fans, it goes that Carrie isn't seeing a separate spirit world at all. She's seeing the same population Elmore keeps losing, that the things drifting around town that only she can perceive are the deleted, people the world removed, not fully gone, still present in some degraded way, invisible to everybody whose memory was tidied up. And she can see them because she's already dead, so the forgetting doesn't work on her the same way. I don't think there's enough on screen to support it, honestly, but I understand why people reach for it, because it's the theory that makes the two big supernatural systems in this show into one system, and there's a tidiness to that which is very appealing at 2 a.m. The version I actually believe is duller and sadder. I think Carrie is exactly what she appears to be. A girl who has been 14 for 3 centuries, who sees more than anybody around her, who has adapted to it so completely that it's become tedious rather than terrifying, and who spends her time hanging around a school because that's where the people are. She could go anywhere. She's not bound to Elmore. She moves between the living world and the underworld freely, which is unusual for a ghost in this show's rules, because her mortal father's side keeps her tethered to this one. She chooses the school. She chooses the same classroom, year after year, with the same teacher and a rotating cast of 12-year-olds who will all be gone in a decade, and who she will presumably watch grow old and die. I don't think anyone in Elmore has ever once asked her how she's finding that. And speaking of things in that family that nobody's ever asked about, I want to talk about Darwin. Specifically, I want to talk about the fact that he's the 4th one. There's an episode where they find bones under Gumball's bed. Small ones. Fish ones. It's a gag. The Watterson house is filthy. They're cleaning it out. Look at the state of what's under there. And it lasts about as long as a gag needs to. Those are Darwin's bones. Not this Darwin's. The first ones. Right. Let me lay out the family history properly, because it's genuinely one of the strangest bits of backstory this show has, and it's delivered almost entirely as comedy. Darwin the First was a goldfish. Richard bought him. He was the family pet. He lived in a bowl. He did the things goldfish do, and he died of natural causes, which is the only one of these 4 that isn't somebody's fault. He got flushed down the toilet. Darwin II was purchased immediately afterwards to cover it up. The plan being that Gumball would never notice the difference, because he was small and it's a goldfish. Darwin II died when he was launched out of his bowl by the family trampoline. Darwin III was purchased to cover up Darwin II. He died because Nicole put his bowl on the roof of the car while she was loading up, forgot it was there, and drove off. The bowl came down and broke. Darwin IV is the one who grew legs. That's our Darwin. The one who talks, who goes to school, who is Gumball's brother in every way that matters, and is legally an adopted member of the family. He is the 4th attempt at a pet fish, purchased as a replacement, for a replacement for a replacement, specifically so that a child would not have to be told that something had died, and then he became a person. I have to be honest, the first time I properly registered this, I sat there for a while. because the show does not treat it as a horror. It treats it as family history. There's an episode about the origins of the whole household, and it's warm and funny and quite moving in places, and this is simply part of the furniture of it. But look at what's underneath. Darwin's entire existence begins as a lie of convenience, not a malicious one, an ordinary, small parental one, the kind millions of people have told. Your hamster went to live on a farm. The plant's fine, it's just resting. Nobody's a villain here. Nicole and Richard were doing what tired parents do, which is buy a nearly identical animal and hope for the best. Except this one woke up. And here's the fan reading, which I think is the strongest one attached to this family. The Wattersons' first instinct, when something disappears, is to substitute rather than acknowledge. That's the pattern. Something's gone, so put a similar thing in the gap and don't mention it. Which is the same reflex the static runs on, just at family scale. I don't want to overstate that. The void doesn't replace anybody. It takes them, and it takes the memory of them. And that's a different operation. But the underlying assumption is identical, that the correct response to a loss is to make the loss unnoticeable. The world tidies away the fact of Molly. The Wattersons tidy away the fact of Darwin the First. Both are, in their own way, an act of kindness, with a mad conclusion. There's a question sitting in the middle of all this that the show never asks, and I've never seen anyone answer satisfactorily. Does Darwin know? He knows about the bones because he's in the episode where they find them. He knows about his own origin because that gets covered. But there's a difference between knowing the facts and having thought about them. And I don't believe for a second that Darwin has ever sat down and properly worked through the implications of being the fourth in a series where the first three are dead and his brother wasn't told about any of it. Darwin is, of all the characters in that show, the one least likely to sit with something uncomfortable. He's relentlessly sunny. He's the one who assumes the best. There's a running thing across the series where the darker the situation gets, the more determinedly cheerful he becomes, and I've always read that as a coping mechanism rather than a personality, which is a rough thing to say about a goldfish. But here we are. Here's a detail that I think is the most quietly upsetting thing in this whole stretch, and it's a production fact rather than a plot one. Darwin doesn't have a known biological family. It's never been resolved. Where he came from before the pet shop, whether he had parents in any sense that applies to a goldfish, whether there are others, none of it. Fans have asked about it for years. It has been raised with the creator directly. And as recently as the revival press, the answer has essentially been that it might get addressed eventually, and that it won't necessarily be dark. So the show is aware people want to know, and has declined to say, for well over a decade. I have a suspicion, and it's only that, so treat it accordingly. I suspect the reason there's no answer is that any answer makes it worse. If Darwin has a family somewhere, then he was taken from them and sold. If he doesn't, then he's the only one of his kind, produced by an aquarium supply chain, and his personhood is an accident that happened to the fourth unit in a shipment. Neither of those is a story you can put in a children's cartoon without changing the whole texture of the show. So it stays open, and the openness is doing a lot of work. One more thing and then I'll leave the poor fish alone. The name. Darwin. Named presumably, for the obvious reason, given that he's a creature who spontaneously developed legs, lungs and speech in a suburban living room. But the name isn't his, it's the position's. Darwin the First had it. Darwin the Second and Third inherited it without anybody asking. It's the name that belongs to whichever fish is currently in the bowl. So the thing our Darwin is called isn't a name at all. It's a job title. It was a job title before he existed, and he's the one who happened to be holding it when he stopped being a job and started being a person. And given everything else we've talked about tonight, given a world where having a role is the only thing that keeps you real, I'd say Darwin got extremely lucky in a way nobody in that house has ever appreciated. Which brings me neatly onto his brother, and the fact that Gumball isn't called Gumball either. Gumball is a nickname. That gets dropped fairly casually in an episode called The Promise, the name he's gone by his entire life isn't the name on the paperwork. It's a family thing that's stuck. And for a while, that's all it is, one of those little bits of texture that shows accumulate. Then in the third season, an episode called The Name Goes and Looks at what the paperwork actually says. His name is Zach. Zach Christopher Watterson, if you want the full thing, which I do because Christopher is a superb piece of nonsense, and it's canon for both of them. Now the setup of the episode is comedy of the most straightforward kind. Boy finds out his real name is cooler than his nickname. Boy starts leaning into it. Boy gets insufferable. He puts on purple sunglasses, he pops his collar, he acquires a skateboard and a deeper voice, and starts referring to himself in the third person. And it's very funny for about 4 minutes, because we all know somebody who's had a phase, and then it stops being a phase. Because Zach isn't a mood Gumball is in. Zach is a separate entity, and he's rewriting the memories. That's the mechanism, and it's specific enough to be worth going through carefully. Zach's method isn't violence. He goes into Gumball's past and edits it. He finds the moments where Gumball lost, and there are a lot of them. Gumball loses constantly. That's most of the show. And he converts them into victories. Defeats become wins. Embarrassments become triumphs. And as each memory gets overwritten, Gumball fades a little more out of existence. There's a sequence where Gumball is inside his own recollections trying to find something that hasn't been touched yet, watching his own history rewrite itself around him, becoming steadily less solid as it goes. In a Cartoon Network sitcom, on a Tuesday, the family's response to this is my favourite thing in the episode because it's so completely, stupidly practical. They get in the car and drive to the town hall to legally change his name. Not an exorcism, not a magic ritual, administration. The threat is a name, so they're going to file a form. Zach obviously tries to stop them. He cuts the brake lines. He reports the car stolen so the police will block the road. He fires a bazooka at Tobias, which, again, this is a children's program, and there's a chase. And it's genuinely tense, and the tension comes entirely from whether a family can reach a government office before their son is administratively overwritten. They get there. And at the counter, when Gumball has to sign the document, he can't remember what to write. Zach's got the name. What saves him is one memory Zach didn't bother to rewrite, because it was already a win. Gumball and Darwin at an arcade, the one time he came first at anything. He reaches it, he enters his name on the high score screen, and that act of typing it is what brings it back. Zach comes apart, and then, because this is Gumball, the clerk mentions that they could have done the whole thing online. Right, the theory. The reading that stuck with me is that in Elmore, identity is administrative, not psychological, not spiritual, clerical. What you are is what the records say you are. And if the records change, you change. And once you're holding that, it lines up uncomfortably well with everything else we've been through tonight. Rob got deleted for having no listed function. Molly got deleted for having no distinguishing features. Darwin's name was a slot in a filing system before it was a person. And here's a boy who nearly ceased to exist because a form had the wrong word on it, and who was saved by going and correcting the form. Same rule, same world. Nobody in it seems to find this odd. There's a version of this theory that goes further, and I think it goes too far, but I'll give it to you because it's fun. It says Zach didn't appear when Gumball found out the name. Zach was always there. He's what Gumball would have been if the nickname hadn't taken. A fully formed alternative person who's been sat in the paperwork this whole time, waiting for someone to say the word out loud. Under that reading, Gumball isn't a nickname. It's a containment measure. And whoever started using it all those years ago was keeping something in a box. I don't buy it. The episode's pretty clearly about ego rather than possession. But I understand the appeal, and I'll admit the show gives you just enough rope. The game Gumball's playing, in the opening scene, is called Doppelganger, which is not a subtle bit of signposting, and is very obviously deliberate. What I do think is real, and what I find genuinely interesting about Zach as a character, is the specific way he's awful. He's not violent for the sake of it. He's not chaotic. His entire behavioural pattern is the refusal to acknowledge a loss. That's the whole thing. Gumball, for all his faults, knows he's a bit of a disaster and lives with it. That's arguably his defining quality, that he keeps going while being fully aware of how badly it's going. Zack can't do that. Zack cannot tolerate having failed at anything, and so he goes back and edits history until the record is clean. He's not an evil twin. He's a man who's decided that the past is negotiable. And I'd argue the reason he's frightening isn't the bazooka, it's that his method works. He does successfully rewrite most of a life. The only thing that stops him is one arcade machine and a 2-second high score. Here's a fun detail to finish on, and it's a lovely bit of continuity sloppiness that fans have never let go of. During the climax, Zack announces that his name is spelled Z-A-C, no H, which would be a fine distinguishing detail for an alter ego, except a later episode shows Gumball writing his old name on a clipboard, and there it's C-A-C-H. So either the show made a mistake, or the entity that manipulates written records got the record wrong. I know which one it is. I choose to enjoy the other one. And on the subject of versions of Gumball that aren't quite right, there was a period where this show had to sit and look at a distorted copy of itself, and rather than sue anybody, they put it in an episode. So there was a Chinese animated series called Miracle Star. I'm going to be measured about this because I don't want to be sneering about a production I've only seen clips of, but the short version is that it was extremely similar to Gumball. Not in the way that all sitcoms about families are similar in the way where you look at a still frame and go, right, yes, I see what's happened here. And in the 5th season, Gumball made an episode about it. It's called The Copycats, and the premise is that the Watterson family encounter versions of themselves. Not doubles versions, slightly wrong. The proportions are off. The colours aren't quite the colours, everything about them is recognisable, and nothing about them is right. And the episode's comedy comes almost entirely from that gap. What I like about it, and what I think elevates it above a simple bit of score settling, is that the episode isn't really angry. There's a needling quality, obviously, but the thing it's actually interested in is what it feels like to meet a copy of yourself and realise the copy also thinks it's the original. Now, put that next to the thing I opened this entire video with. The cast of this show came from a folder of rejected commercial designs. Characters drawn for adverts that never ran. Bockelay took things that had been made for one purpose, discarded, and then repurposed them into a completely different life, which is, functionally, what a knockoff does. I'm not saying they're the same thing. Legally and ethically, they're miles apart, and I want to be clear about that. But structurally, there's a rhyme, and I don't think the show is unaware of it. This is a program built out of second-hand parts, which then had its own parts taken second-hand, and which then made an episode about the experience. That's the theory here, and it's more of a lens than a conspiracy, so set your expectations accordingly. The idea is that Elmore's fundamental design principle is recursion. Every version of these characters exists somewhere. The used ones, the unused ones, the copies, the drafts, and the world has a mechanism for filing the ones that didn't make it. I mentioned right at the start that the static contains prototype designs of the Watterson house. I want to come back to that now, because in this context it means something slightly different. The void isn't just where forgotten people go, it's where earlier versions go. Drafts, attempts, the design that didn't get picked, which means that floating around in that dimension, at least in principle, are the versions of these characters that got rejected during production. The eyes that were too big, the shade of blue that didn't test well, the Darwin with a different face. Every character in Elmore has a graveyard of near misses somewhere behind them. And that lands differently once you know the cast started life as a folder of rejects, because it means Gumball is a show about discarded designs that made it, set in a world that contains a landfill of discarded designs that didn't. I find that genuinely lovely, in a slightly morbid way. It's not a horror, it's closer to survivor's guilt. Here's another angle on the same thing, and this one's a production fact rather than a theory. This show changed its own characters constantly. Not just between seasons, the animation style shifts within single scenes. Characters are drawn, puppeted, rendered in CGI, stop-motioned, photographed, and composited together in the same frame, and the show treats that as normal. Gumball's own design changed noticeably between the first and second seasons. His voice changed repeatedly because the actors were children, and children's voices do that, so the role has passed through several performers across the run. Every one of those changes replaced a version of the character with a different version, and I keep coming back to the boys standing in that hallway in the revival, listing the inconsistencies. Their voices changed, their designs changed, they said it out loud, they noticed, so the characters are aware at some level that they've been replaced by copies of themselves, repeatedly, over years, and the ones they used to be are, by the rules of their own universe, exactly the sort of thing that ends up in the static, which raises a question I've never seen anyone properly ask. What happened to the first season Gumball? Not the actor, the character, the one with the different proportions and the different voice. He was in the world, and then he wasn't, and a slightly altered version was in his place, and nobody in Elmore commented for 7 years until 2 of them stood in a hallway and went, "Hang on." There's no answer to that. The show doesn't offer one. But by its own stated rules, an obsolete version of something is precisely what the void collects. Something lighter, because that got heavier than I intended. The show also did a crossover with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Actual Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared in an episode called The Puppets, complete with characters and settings from it. If you don't know it, it's a British web series that starts as a cheerful puppet show for children, and does not remain one, and it is not the sort of thing you'd expect a major network to invite round for tea. And they did. Cartoon Network let Gumball collaborate with that. There were also cameos from Clarence, regular show, and Uncle Grandpa in another episode, which is more standard network business. But The Puppets is the one that tells you what kind of operation this was. The people making this show had an unusual amount of rope, and they used all of it. I think that's why the meta stuff in Gumball works when it fails almost everywhere else. It isn't a show winking at the audience to seem clever. It's a show made by people who are genuinely thinking about what it means to be a cartoon. What gets kept, what gets thrown out, who decides, and what happens to the ones who don't make the cut. And they'd already answered that question in season 3. It's a dimension made of static, and there's a mullet in it. Right, let's talk about the most powerful person in Elmore, and the fact that she works at a rainbow factory. There's a particular frame of Nicole Watterson losing her temper that gets passed around a lot, and I understand why. Her pupils go, the light goes, and what's left is not really a face anymore. The show does this repeatedly. Her anger has a visual grammar to it that nothing else in Elmore has, a shift in the animation itself, as though the medium can't quite contain what's happening. And it's always played for comedy, and it's always slightly too effective to be only comedy. I want to do this one carefully, because this is the point in these videos where people usually start being funny about a cartoon mother in a way that doesn't sit right with me. So let me put the canon down first, plainly, and then get to the theory. Nicole was Nicole Senecourt before she was a Watterson. Her parents are Daniel and Mary, and they were mentioned in passing for years before the show finally put them on screen. The episode that does it is called The Choices, and it's one of the best things this programme ever made. It's structured as Nicole thinking back over how she ended up where she is. A chaotic dinner table, 3 children shouting for food, a husband who is not helping, and running through the alternate versions of her life she might have had. What comes out in the flashbacks is a childhood of relentless expectation. There's a report card in there, and if you pause it, it's got 1 F on it. 1. And that's the thing she's being taken apart for. There's a version of the exchange where being a girl is explicitly dismissed as an excuse, which tells you the flavour of the household. At the point of those flashbacks, She's in the 7th year of school. The same year Gumball and Darwin are in now, so we're talking about a 12-year-old. She and her parents didn't speak for years afterwards. That estrangement is a plot point in a later episode, where the family bump into them in a supermarket and the kids try to broker a reconciliation, mostly out of self-interest regarding a backlog of unclaimed birthday presents. And the other thing the Choices establishes, quietly, is that Gumball was conceived before the marriage, which reframes a fair amount. Nicole's life didn't go the way it was supposed to go by the standards of the house she grew up in, and it went wrong early. The job at the Rainbow Factory came after. She's been there ever since. She is, by an enormous margin, the only reliable earner in that household. Now, the theory. The widely held fan reading, and this one is entirely fan-made, I want to be very clear about that, is that Nicole's competence is a lid. That the rage isn't an aspect of her personality, it's the pressure of everything she put down in order to be where she is, and that the reason it manifests as something the animation struggles to draw is that it's genuinely the most dangerous force in the town. People have written a lot of very silly things about this. There's a strand of it that treats her as some kind of demonic entity, which I think misses the point completely, and also isn't as interesting as what's actually on the page. Here's what I think is the better version. The Choices ends with Nicole running through every alternative life available to her. The successful one, the wealthy one, the one where she married someone her parents would have approved of, and concluding that she wouldn't change any of it. And then she starts a food fight. That's the ending. She looks at every escape route and picks the mess, which means Elmore's most powerful character chose a small life on purpose, and the show frames that as a happy ending. And I don't think it's being naive about it. I think the episode knows exactly how much she gave up, and is arguing that she gained something worth more, and it makes the argument well enough that I believe it. But the theory sits underneath that and asks a fairly uncomfortable question. What does it cost to hold that choice in place every single day, in a house where nobody except possibly Anais has any idea what you're holding? Because Richard doesn't know. Richard genuinely does not perceive that any sacrifice occurred, and the kids certainly don't. From their side, Mum works a lot and gets cross sometimes. The rage under this reading isn't a supernatural power, it's a pressure valve on a woman who is running the entire structure of a household on her own, and has been since she was about 19. I find that a considerably more interesting character than a monster, and it's better supported by what's on screen. There's a canon detail I'd add to it, which the show plays as a running joke, but which is doing real work. Nicole is an exceptional martial artist. It comes up more than once. There's a whole thread about her upbringing involving a discipline she was pushed into, and the physical capability is presented as another thing that got left behind. So she has this in her, trained, drilled, presumably at some cost, and it lives in a woman who spends her days on a factory line and her evenings breaking up arguments about who's touching whose side of the sofa. Here's a fun detail that I think is the single most telling thing about her, and it's about the arrests. Nicole has been shown arrested, or nearly arrested, on multiple occasions across the series. Different episodes, different circumstances. It happens often enough that it's basically a running gag, and in every case the situation that got her there was somebody else's. I'm not going to pretend that's deep, but it is a pattern, and patterns in this show tend to be deliberate. I said I'd do this one carefully, so let me finish with where I actually land. I don't think Nicole Watterson is a suppressed monster. I think she's the most competent adult in a town of absolute liabilities, and I think the show's genuinely fond of her, and I think The Choices is a warmer and more generous episode about parenthood than most programs for adults manage. But I also think the reason that frame of her losing it gets shared so much isn't because it's funny, it's because everybody watching recognises something in it. The person holding the whole thing together, for 1 second not holding it, and then holding it again, because that's the job. Anyway, 6 years after all this stopped, it started again. And the way they explained the gap is my favourite thing in this entire video. On the 28th of July, 2025, Gumball came back. The new one is called The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, and it went out on Hulu in the States before rolling out internationally in the autumn. It had been announced in one form or another for years. It had been a film, then it had been a spin-off, then it had been a 7th season, then it had been rebranded again. The whole thing had been shuffled around long enough that a decent number of people had stopped expecting it, and when the characters turned up, they were covered in dust. Now that's a visual gag. It reads as one. Cobwebby, unused, blowing the muck off the furniture. Fine, we get it, it's been a while. Except Bokele was asked about it, and his explanation was that they'd just been unanimated the whole time it was off. That they wake up and go, right, we have to get on with our lives now. Unanimated, not dormant, not waiting, not drawn. So the gap in production is, in universe, a stretch the characters spent not existing, and they have some awareness of it. They come back knowing that time passed and that they weren't in it. There's another layer to that which I don't think gets enough attention. The leads were recast. Alkayo Thiele is Gumball now. Hero Hunter is Darwin. Kinza Syed Khan is Anais. Teresa Gallagher and Dan Russell are still Nicole and Richard, which gives the family this strange configuration where the parents sound exactly as they always have, and the children don't. And as we've established, the characters can hear it. They put it on the list, their voices changed, and they noticed, which means the revival has a family in it, where the kids came back from all that non-existence sounding like different people, and their mother, who sounds exactly the same, has not remarked on it. I'm not sure that's intentional. I'm fairly sure it's not, but it's there. Right, the finale. 20 episodes went out in the first batch, and then a second batch, referred to as the second season, landed on the 22nd of December 2025. The last of those is called The Rewrite, and it's the 280th episode of this thing overall, and it is the one that finally picks up the freeze frame from 2019. I've already told you most of what's in it, because it's the episode where the rule about awareness gets stated and where Rob does his script editing. But I held one thing back, and it's the answer to the cliffhanger. Rob didn't fall. The moment he goes over the edge, something reaches in and pulls him out. A claw from a van. The van belongs to the Awesome Store, a shop that sells mysterious items, run by a shady bloke who's been drifting around the edges of this show for a long time, doing very little of consequence. And it turns out he knew. The whole time. He's known the world is fictional, apparently, for years. And he's been quietly maintaining the status quo from a van. He hires Rob as his apprentice. So the resolution to the biggest cliffhanger in the show's history is that the villain gets rescued by a background shopkeeper and given a job in continuity maintenance, which should be an anticlimax, and somehow isn't, because it's exactly the right ending for this particular character. Rob's entire arc has been about needing a role. He gets the best one available, the person who keeps everybody else safe by keeping them ignorant. There's a moment in that episode where Rob works out that the cleanest solution is to write his own death, to plug the hole with himself, and he's fine with it, genuinely at peace, satisfied that he'd have given himself a proper ending. The censors reject it, as I mentioned, so he doesn't get his dignified exit, he gets a stupid one involving a helmet, and then he doesn't die anyway. Even his martyrdom gets edited down for content. I laughed and then I felt bad about laughing, which is roughly the standard Gumball experience. There's one more piece of information in that episode that I find quietly devastating, and it's about the disfigurement, the glitching, the static panels on his head that he's carried since he crawled out of the void. It's caused by a magic Rubik's Cube. The shopkeeper owns it. I don't want to make more of that than it can bear, But think about what it implies. The damage that defined an entire character for a decade. The thing that made him a monster, that made him bitter, that gave him a reason, has a physical cause sitting in a van in Elmore. It's an object, someone has it. And nobody did anything about it for 10 years. Right, where does that leave us? In December of 2025, 2 more seasons were ordered. So the show's continuing, which, by the rules it has set for itself, means the static stays where it is. Elmore persists because the programme persists. The characters are alive in the most literal sense available to them. They're in production. Bockelay was asked, around the time the revival launched, about the darker fan readings. The simulation ones, the one where the whole thing is a child's traumatic experience playing out. And what he said was that he has his own theory, which he will not reveal. He said that on the record, to an interviewer, about his own show. I've turned that over a fair few times, and I still don't know what to do with it. On the most likely reading, it's a creator being playful and keeping the mystery box shut, which is fair enough, and what most of them would say. But he didn't say, there's no answer. He didn't say it's just a cartoon. He said he has one, and he's keeping it. There was also a moment in that same press round where he was asked about an episode fans had latched onto, some piece of lore they were convinced was coming, and he answered by saying that he didn't think that episode was one they made this season, which is either a straightforward denial or a very dry joke about a show where episodes can be written and unwritten by a bloke in a van. I lean joke, but I'd have said that about a lot of things in this show before I looked properly. Anyway, that's where it stands. The show that built a monster out of ending is still going, which means the monster stays parked. And there's a character in it now whose entire job is making sure 2 12-year-olds never finish the thought they started in their own hallway. I hope he manages it. I've grown quite fond of him. Lucy Simeon is the oldest character in the show. Not the oldest looking, the oldest. In a series that contains a girl who has been 14 since the 17th century, the teacher outranks her. She's a baboon, roughly. Grey, hunched, with a face that seems to have been constructed primarily out of disappointment. She teaches Gumball's class. She has taught Gumball's class for the entire run, and she taught Nicole and Richard before that, which the show establishes without fuss in the flashback material. That last bit is where it starts to come apart, if you think about it for more than a moment. Because the flashbacks in this show don't sit still. Nicole and Richard's school years have been shown a few times now, and the era keeps quietly sliding forward to stay a comfortable distance behind the present. That's standard practice for a long-running sitcom, and I don't hold it against anybody. But it means the length of Miss Simeon's tenure is not a fixed number. It's a rubber band. However long the show runs, she's been at that school longer, and the show leans into the ancient angle rather than away from it. She's described in terms that place her origin considerably further back than any school. There's a running conceit about her being a prehistoric holdover, something that predates the institution she works in by an order of magnitude nobody in the staff room finds worth discussing. Right, theory time, and this one's fan-made from top to bottom, but I think it's got legs. The reading is that Miss Simeon isn't a teacher who happens to be old. She's a fixture that the school was built around. She was there first. The building went up where she was standing, and the curriculum arranged itself around her, and the students have been rotating past her for so long that the individual faces stopped registering somewhere around the invention of the wheel, which would explain the single most consistent thing about her, which is the contempt. She doesn't like the children. That's not a personality quirk. That's the load-bearing fact of the character. She's not a strict teacher who secretly cares, and the show has been admirably disciplined about not softening her into one. There are a handful of moments across the whole run where she demonstrates something like warmth, and every one of them is immediately undercut. under the ancient fixture reading, that contempt makes a kind of exhausted sense. If you have watched an effectively unlimited number of 12-year-olds pass through the same room making the same mistakes, individual children stop being individuals. They're weather. They arrive, they do the thing children do, they leave, and another lot turn up in September. You wouldn't hate them exactly. You just have stopped being able to see them. Here's the detail that I think is the strongest evidence for something being genuinely off about her, and it's from the finale we talked about earlier. When the live-action superintendent arrives and starts converting the school, Miss Simeon's response is to make a move on him. She drops Principal Brown, who she's been in a relationship with for seasons, one of the show's more committed running plots, and goes after the new authority immediately. And when Gumball calls her two-faced for it, the show has her physically rotate her head to reveal a second face on the back, made up. That's a gag. It's a good one. But it's also the show telling you, in the most literal way available to it, that there is more of this character than you have been shown. I want to sit for a second on the Principal Brown thing, because it's one of the odder ongoing situations in Elmore, and nobody ever addresses the arithmetic of it. Brown is a dog. He is presumably a dog length of life sort of person, and he is in a long-term relationship with something that has been at that school since before the school, and neither of them appears to have raised it. Elmore does this constantly, and I think it's part of why the town feels wrong in a way that's difficult to point at. It's not that impossible things happen. It's that impossible things happen and nobody follows up. There's a version of this theory that goes further, and I'll give it to you, although I'm lukewarm on it. It says Miss Simeon is the reason nobody in Elmore ages, that she's an anchor, something so fixed that time in her vicinity has stopped moving properly, and the school is the epicenter of whatever's holding the whole town in place. I don't buy it, mainly because the show has since given a much better explanation for the frozen timeline, and we've already been through it. But the instinct behind it is sound. If you were looking for the oldest thing in Elmore, and you wanted to know why the town doesn't move forward, you would end up in that classroom, and she would be looking at you the way she looks at everybody. During one of the Halloween episodes, the whole cast dresses up, and the costumes are genuinely inspired. Mr. Small as Sailor Moon, Principal Brown as Shirley Temple, Richard as Kratos, Banana Joe as Pikachu. Miss Simeon goes as Ming the Merciless, an ancient authoritarian who rules by contempt, dressed as an ancient authoritarian who rules by contempt. Not evidence of anything, just very funny, and I suspect somebody in that room knew exactly what they were doing. Richard Watterson does nothing. That's the joke. He's a large pink rabbit who has not worked in living memory, who eats continuously, who watches television from a horizontal position, and whose contribution to the household ranges from 0 to actively negative. He's the sitcom dad taken to a logical extreme, and for the first couple of seasons, that's genuinely all he is. Then there's an episode where he gets a job. It's called The Job, and it is one of the strangest things this show has ever done. The premise is exactly what it says. Richard gets employment, delivering a pizza, and the consequence is that reality starts coming apart. Not metaphorically. The world visibly degrades as he does the task. Things stop working properly. The rules of the place loosen, and at one point, Nicole is reduced to a sort of blobulous puddle, which is not a state a person is supposed to be able to be in. The show's framing is that Richard doing something raised the bar, and the bar being raised broke everything downstream of it. And out of that, fans built what I think is the single most enjoyable theory in the entire Gumball canon. The theory is that Richard's uselessness is load-bearing, that he isn't a lazy man in a functioning world. He's a component of the world's stability, and his inactivity is what keeps the whole structure from wobbling. Elmore runs on a certain amount of slack, and Richard is the slack. I love this one, partly because it's silly, and partly because the episode really does behave as though it's true. Now, the version of the theory I find more interesting is the softer one, and it goes like this. Richard isn't holding reality together. Richard is the only person in Elmore who is genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy, and that's a far more unusual condition in this town than the theory makers give it credit for. Run through the cast. Gumball is anxious and constantly failing. Darwin is cheerful in a way I've already suggested is a coping strategy. Anais is a 4-year-old with the intellect of an adult and no peers, which is a form of solitary confinement. Nicole we've discussed. Rob spent a decade as a glitching revenge project. Carrie has been 14 for 300 years. Miss Simeon is running on pure contempt. And then there's a rabbit on a sofa who genuinely, sincerely wants nothing. There's a fair chunk of the series that's about the family trying to fix him, and it never takes. Every attempt to make Richard ambitious, employable, self-improving, or self-aware collapses back to baseline within 22 minutes. The show is very consistent about this. He is not on a journey. He does not grow. And I'd argue that's not laziness in the writing, it's the point. Richard is the control group. He's what a person in Elmore looks like when they haven't been damaged by the place, which raises a question I don't have an answer to. Why hasn't the world removed him? By the rules we established at the start of tonight, the ones about relevance and having a function, and what happens to people who don't, Richard should be a prime candidate. He contributes nothing. He has no role. He is on paper precisely the sort of entity that ends up in the static. And he's fine. He's been fine for 280 episodes. There are a couple of ways round it. The generous one is that Richard has a function after all, and the function is emotional. He's the reason the household holds, in a way that isn't measurable, and that the Void's criteria might not be equipped to assess. The cynical one is that he's just entertaining, and entertaining is the actual metric, and always was. That second reading is a bit uncomfortable if you sit with it, because it means Molly wasn't removed for being boring in any deep sense. She was removed for being boring to watch, which is, of course, exactly what happened to her in production. Right, some canon about Richard's own background, because there is some, and it's more interesting than people expect. His mother is Granny Jojo. She's a considerable presence, overbearing, sharp, and by no means unintelligent, which is a point people bring up whenever anyone tries to argue that Richard's family are just thick. She remarried in a later episode to a man called Louis, which makes Richard's family situation more active than Nicole's by a comfortable margin. And Richard's father, Frankie, was mentioned for years before finally turning up, so he's not an orphan of the narrative. There's a family there. The show simply chose to make his defining feature the fact that nothing much has ever been asked of him. And there's one bit that makes me suspect the writers were fonder of this theory than they ever let on. There's an episode about laziness where Richard appears to be changing the television channel with his mind. No remote in sight, no explanation, just a man on a sofa altering the world by wanting to. The eventual reveal is that the remote was, in the most unfortunate sense, on his person the whole time, which is a gag, and a fairly crude one. But for about 11 minutes, the show lets you sit with the possibility that the most inert character in Elmore is quietly capable of altering reality without moving. And given what happens in the job when he does move, I'd argue that possibility never entirely goes away. I don't think he's a god. I want to be clear about that. But I do think there's something the show understands about him that it's never spelled out. And it's this: in a world that decides your right to exist based on what you're for, Richard Watterson is for nothing, and the world has never come for him. Which means either the rules have an exception, or he knows something everyone else doesn't. He doesn't, obviously. He's a rabbit on a sofa, but it's a nice thought at this hour. There's an episode called The Finale, and despite the name, it isn't one. It went out at the end of the second season, and the show carried on for another 4. The premise is that every consequence catches up at once. Across the first 2 seasons, the Wattersons had done an enormous amount of damage. That's the engine of the show. They cause a problem, the problem escalates absurdly, and by the end, everything's roughly back where it started with no lasting harm. Standard sitcom physics. This episode simply asks, what if it didn't reset? So the bills arrive, the people they've wronged arrive, every unpaid debt, every ruined event, every act of casual destruction across 2 seasons comes home in a single afternoon, and the entire town works out simultaneously that this one family has been responsible for essentially everything wrong with their lives. And Elmore forms a mob, not a comedy mob. Well, it is a comedy mob, there are gags in it, but the tone underneath is genuinely nasty. The townspeople converge on the house at 742 Elmore Street with the specific intention of doing something about the Wattersons. And the family barricade themselves in, and the episode does not treat this as an overreaction. That's the bit that gets me. The show is on the town's side, not entirely, but enough. It has spent 2 seasons building a case, and this is the case being presented. Rob's in that episode too, incidentally, and there's a line of his I've always found funny, in a bleak way. He's among the crowd breaking into the house, and his contribution to the list of grievances is that they kicked him down a manhole. Which they did. That happened. Now, how the episode ends is where it gets strange, and it's the reason it's in this video. It doesn't end, it stops. The mob gets in. The situation reaches the point where there is no available way out, and the episode cuts. There's a hard stop, and the show comes back the following week with everything normal. And a theory grew up around that gap. The grim version, which was popular for a while, is that the Wattersons were killed, that the episode cut because what happened next couldn't be shown, and that everything after it is a continuity the show simply chose not to acknowledge. I don't hold with that one, mostly because it doesn't explain anything the ordinary reading doesn't explain better, but the more interesting version came later, once the static had been introduced, and it's this: the void saved them. The idea is that the cut at the end of the finale isn't a cut at all. It's an intervention. The situation had become unresolvable, which is another way of saying the show had written itself into a corner it couldn't get out of, which is another way of saying a mistake had been made. And we know what happens to mistakes in this universe. Under that reading, the world reached into the episode, removed the problem, and put everybody back where they were supposed to be. Not to protect the Wattersons, to protect the show. Because a version of events where the main characters are torn apart by an angry mob is a version that cannot continue, and continuation is the only thing this universe genuinely cares about. I like that theory a great deal, and I want to be straight that it's fan-made and that it's built retroactively. Nobody was thinking about the static when they wrote the finale. The reading was assembled afterwards by people looking backward with new information, which is how most good fan theories work, and also how most bad ones do. But it holds together better than it has any right to, and it explains a thing about this show that's otherwise slightly odd, which is how often episodes end by simply refusing to conclude. Now, the mob itself is worth a moment, because Elmore does this more than once. There's a recurring quality to that town, where the population can turn very fast, and where the collective mood is treated as a physical force rather than a bunch of individual opinions. It's not that people disagree with the Wattersons, it's that the town, as a single object, decides something, and then behaves accordingly. I've never seen a version of that theorised properly, but I'd put it forward now as something worth chewing on. Elmore doesn't behave like a settlement full of individuals. It behaves like one thing with a lot of faces. When it wants something, everyone wants it at the same time. When it forgets something, everyone forgets it at the same moment. We know that last bit is literally true because we've seen it happen with a missing girl and 3 witnesses. So if the forgetting is synchronised, Why wouldn't the wanting be? There's a piece of set dressing in that episode that I think about more than anything else in it. During the chaos, the family go through their photo album, and the photographs don't match. The versions of themselves in the pictures are from different design eras, different proportions, different styles, the characters as they used to be drawn. It's a joke about the show's own visual history. It's also, if you're feeling uncharitable, a family looking at photographic evidence that they used to be different people and finding nothing remarkable in it. That album gets referenced again years later in the revival, when the boys start noticing their own inconsistencies. Which means somebody in that writer's room kept that thread in their back pocket for the better part of a decade before pulling on it. I find that genuinely impressive. Most shows can't remember what they did last season. For the first few seasons, Penny Fitzgerald is a peanut with antlers. That's a design that works entirely as a visual joke and doesn't invite much thought. She's a peanut. Her dad's a peanut. Her family are peanuts. Fine, this is a town where a paper cutout has anxiety and a balloon has a girlfriend, so a peanut is barely worth remarking on. Then there's an episode called The Shell, and Gumball cracks it. Accidentally, and in a moment that plays as a disaster, because from Penny's side, it absolutely is one. What's underneath the shell is not a peanut. It's a shape-shifting, fairy-like creature whose form changes according to what she's feeling. Not a fixed shape, a responsive one. When she's angry, she becomes something angry-shaped. When she's frightened, something else. The body is downstream of the emotion, moment to moment, with no stable default to return to, and she has spent her entire life inside a rigid shell that hides it. The episode handles this beautifully, for what it's worth. It's about acceptance, and about Gumball having to look at what's actually there, rather than what he'd built up in his head, and it's one of the most genuinely tender things the show ever did. There's a kiss at the end that stabilises her, which is a bit convenient, but I'll allow it. What I want to do here is take the mechanism seriously, because I don't think many people have. Penny's family enforced the shell, that's clear. It's a cultural thing on her father's side, presented as tradition, and the horror of the episode is a girl being told from birth that the actual shape of her is not acceptable and must be contained in something rigid. Now hold that next to the rest of the town, because Elmore is full of people who look like objects. A banana family, a cloud, a balloon with a face, a slice of paper, a cactus, a T-Rex who works in a school, a ghost, and every single one of them is treated as fixed. That's just what they are. Nobody in Elmore ever asks whether the shape is the person or the packaging. The theory, and this is a fan reading, though it's one the episode invites fairly hard, is that Penny isn't the exception. She's the one we happen to see cracked open. Under that reading, the visual chaos of Elmore isn't a stylistic gag. It's a town of shells. Everyone's wearing one. Everyone's been wearing one since childhood. And the reason nobody comments is that nobody's ever seen anything else. I want to be measured about this because it's the sort of theory that can be pushed until it snaps. There's no on-screen evidence that Banana Joe is anything other than a banana. The show has never suggested it, but the show also never suggested it about Penny. For 4 seasons, and then it did. Here's the bit I find most interesting, and it's not about the theory at all. It's about what the shell was for. The reason given is protection. That's always the reason. And it isn't wrong exactly. A creature whose body reflects her emotions in real time is a creature who cannot hide anything, ever, from anyone. Every feeling is public the instant it happens. There's no poker face available. There's no privacy. So the shell wasn't only about shame, it was armour against being permanently legible. Which is a considerably more sympathetic reading of her family than the episode gives them, and I've come round to thinking it's the truer one. They weren't hiding her because she was ugly. They were hiding her because she'd have been readable by every person she ever met, and that's a horrible way to go through a school. Now, connecting this back to the rest of tonight, we've spent a fair amount of time on the idea that identity in Elmore is administrative, that what you are is what's on record, and that having a defined role is what keeps you solid. Penny is the counter case. She's the one character whose actual nature has no fixed form at all, and the town's response was to issue her a shape and insist she stay in it, which, if you're inclined toward the darker readings, starts to look less like family tradition and more like compliance. A person with no stable form is a person the system can't file. So the system files her anyway, using a shell, and everybody agrees to treat the file as the truth. I don't think the show means it that way. I think the show means it as a story about a teenage girl and body image and a boy learning to actually look at somebody. It does that well, and it doesn't need my help. But the machinery underneath is the same machinery, and I don't think that's an accident, because this is a program where the machinery is remarkably consistent once you start noticing it. One thing I only worked out embarrassingly late. Penny's original design, the peanut with antlers, is a pun. She's a dough inside a nut. A donut. That's it. That's the whole reason she looked like that for 4 seasons. And when the show cracked the shell, the thing underneath wasn't a deer, which quietly retires a joke it had been running since the pilot. The punchline was load-bearing, and they took it out anyway to tell a better story. Most shows would have kept the joke. There's a version of this show that existed in 2008, 3 years before anybody saw it. A pilot. It was made, it went round internally, and it has a different voice on Gumball entirely, Nicky Jones, who was Chowder, which is a nice bit of trivia, given how many people have spent years insisting the 2 shows are connected. I bring the pilot up because the gap matters. Cartoon Network Studios. Europe existed by 2007. Bockelay was there helping other people pitch. The studio decided everyone should pitch their own thing, and he assembled the reject folder into a school. It was greenlit in 2009 and reached air on the 3rd of May 2011. Which means before there was an Elmore, there were 3 years of an Elmore that only a handful of people had ever seen. A version with different voices, sitting in a building, not being broadcast. Unanimated, you might say. Right, what I actually want to talk about is what happened at the other end, in the gap after 2019, because it's the strangest stretch of this show's history, and almost nobody discusses it. The main series stopped in June of that year, and then in December it came back, sort of. 6 episodes called Darwin's Yearbook. The framing is that Darwin has to put the school yearbook together and is working out who deserves which spot, and the episodes are built predominantly out of recycled clips from the previous 8 years. It's a clip show. Explicitly, unapologetically, structurally, a clip show. Then in October of 2020 there was another run, the Gumball Chronicles, which is also largely clip-based, 8 of those. There was a Halloween one about a curse on the town, and then a set built around a school election that all began with the words, "Vote Gumball." So the sequence goes like this. The show ends on the world beginning to dissolve, and then for the next year and a bit, the only new Gumball anybody gets is the characters sitting around looking at footage of themselves. I don't think anybody planned that. I'm fairly confident it's a straightforward production reality. The series had wrapped, the crew had moved on, the film was in limbo, and clip shows are what you make when you need content and don't have a studio. But as an accident, it's remarkable, and the fan reading that grew out of it is one I've genuinely never been able to shake. The theory is that the clip shows are what dissolution looks like from inside. Think about what a clip show actually is in universe. It's a character sitting in a room, going through the past, unable to generate anything new. Every event has already happened. Nothing is occurring. The only available activity is reviewing footage of a life that has stopped moving forward. And the framing device for the first batch is Darwin trying to decide who gets remembered, who goes in the book, which is, if you want to be uncharitable about it, a boy conducting a relevance audit on his own classmates in a universe that we know deletes people based on relevance. He's doing the Void's job with a yearbook. I want to be clear that I don't think that's what anyone intended, but I'd also point out that the clip shows came out after the static had been established as the show's central threat, and the people making them were the people who'd established it. Somebody in that process must have noticed what they were making. There's a second, smaller reading attached to the Halloween one, which was called The Curse of Elmore, and which involves an infection spreading through the school, characters getting taken over, one by one, laughter that isn't right, the population being converted while a teacher watches it happen on the security cameras and can't stop it. Made in 2020. I'll leave that where it is because the internet has done enough with cartoons that came out in 2020, and I don't need to add to the pile. What I do find worth saying is this: that whole quiet stretch is the closest thing the real world has to a working model of what the show was describing. The characters weren't being made, the stories had stopped. What existed of them was footage, endlessly rearranged into new configurations that contain nothing new. If you'd asked Elmore's own rules what that state was called, the answer would have been fairly clear. And then they turned up again with dust on them. And Bockley said, out loud, that they'd just been unanimated the whole time. So the show's own creator has confirmed the fan reading, more or less, in an interview, while treating it as a light joke. I've stopped being able to tell with this programme where the joke ends. I don't think that's a failing on my part. I think it's a deliberate feature of a series that spent 14 years blurring that line on purpose. Here's the last thing I'll say on it, and it's a small one. Darwin's yearbook exists because a network wanted more Gumball, and there wasn't any. That's the commercial reality, and there's no mystery in it. But it means the last genuinely new thing this show did before it went quiet was ask a goldfish to decide which of his friends were worth remembering. And then everyone went away for 6 years. Arnis Watterson is 4 years old. She's a small pink rabbit. She attends the same school as her 12-year-old brothers, and she is comfortably the most intelligent member of the household, possibly of the town. The show is consistent about this. When a situation requires actual analysis, Anais is the one who provides it, usually while the people around her are doing something catastrophic. And every so often the show remembers she's 4, and it gets uncomfortable. There's a whole strand of episodes about this. Anais has an imaginary friend. Anais has a favourite children's television programme she's deeply attached to and slightly embarrassed about. Anais has tantrums occasionally, and they're rendered as exactly what they are, which is a small child having a bad time. So she's operating with an adult's processing power and a 4-year-old's emotional equipment, in a school full of adolescents, in a family that treats her as the sensible one. That's not a gift, that's a fairly grim arrangement. The theory here is a soft one, and I'd call it more of a reading than a conspiracy, but I think it belongs in this video because it's the thread that runs underneath a lot of the darker material we've been through. It's this: Elmore consistently punishes competence. Look at the pattern. Anais is the smartest and the loneliest. Nicole is the most capable and the most burdened. Rob became aware of his circumstances and it destroyed him. Carrie sees more than anybody and has adapted by becoming permanently unimpressed. Barbara knows what's coming and is dismissed for it. And Richard, who understands nothing whatsoever, is the only genuinely happy person in the postcode. I don't think the show is arguing that ignorance is better. It's too fond of its clever characters for that. But it does keep laying the evidence out, episode after episode, and it never really argues the other way either. Anais gets a particular version of that deal, and it's the loneliest one, because she has no peer group at all. She's too advanced for anybody her age, and too young for anybody at her level. Gumball and Darwin are her brothers, and they love her, but they're also 2 idiots who use her as a resource. There's an episode where she gets set up on a playdate with a boy from a well-off family, and the reason it works is simply that she's found someone who talks to her rather than at her, and the show treats that as a genuinely significant event. She had to be introduced to somebody by her mother to find one conversation. Now here's the piece of canon that I think is quietly the strangest thing about her, and it's not really about her at all. Anais is Richard's daughter. Definitively, she's a pink rabbit, same as him, and the show has never played coy about it, and she's the smartest character in the family, which means that whatever's going on with Richard, it isn't hereditary stupidity. The genetic material produced her. Granny Jojo, his mother, is sharp as anything when she wants to be. Whatever happened to Richard specifically, and the show has never explained it. There's an old fan theory about the war, and about Richard having once been something quite different, built on the flimsiest possible evidence. A hat in one episode with a rabbit insignia on it. I don't believe a word of it, but I understand why people reached, because there's a shape missing there, and human beings can't leave a shape missing. The version I find more likely, and it's still speculation, is that there's nothing to explain, that Richard is exactly what he appears to be, and the interesting question isn't what happened to him, but why nobody in that family finds his condition remarkable. Anna certainly doesn't. She's grown up with it. To her, a father who does nothing is simply what a father is, and I think that's the actual sadness of the character, more than the loneliness. Anais is smart enough to see the household clearly, and young enough that she has no comparison. She knows precisely how the Wattersons work, and has no way of knowing that they don't work the way other families do. In the flashback material about the family's early years, there's a long sequence of Gumball as a baby, then a toddler, being measured against a doorframe by Richard, in a house they were gradually repairing. Anais isn't in most of that. She arrived later into a household that was already established, already chaotic, already running on Nicole's shoulders. She never got the version of that family that was being built. She only got the version that had already settled into what it was going to be. And she's 4. She's been 4 for the entire run of the show, in a place where nobody ages, which means she will be 4 for as long as this thing continues. I keep coming back to that. Everyone in Elmore is stuck, and we've established that fairly thoroughly tonight. But being stuck at 12 is one thing. Being stuck at 4, with the mind she's got, waiting for a growing up that structurally cannot arrive, is a different proposition entirely. She'd work it out if she thought about it properly. She's the one who would. Which, given what we know about what happens to residents of Elmore who work things out, is probably the strongest argument for leaving her be. There is a shop in Elmore called the Awesome Store, and it is not a shop, it's a van. It sells mysterious items. That's the whole business model. Somebody wants a thing, the van has the thing works in a way nobody asked about. And there are consequences. It's the kind of establishment that turns up in a lot of shows. The cursed curiosity shop, the dealer who shouldn't be trusted, the bloke with a suitcase full of monkey's paws. And it's run by a shady man, which is genuinely how he's referred to. He's been drifting around the edges of this series for a very long time, doing not very much, being the source of the occasional problem, and going away again. Then in the finale of the revival's second batch of episodes, he turns out to be the one holding everything together. I mentioned it earlier, the claw that comes out of the van and pulls Rob out of the plot hole. What I didn't get into is what that actually means about the character. He knew. He has known the whole time. This man has been aware that Elmore is fictional, apparently for years, while running a van and selling nonsense to children. He has a copy of the episode script. He calls the hole in the school what it is, a plot hole, and he says, out loud, that all the lives of Elmore's citizens are nothing but fiction. And his job, as far as I can work out, is maintenance. Keep the status quo. Keep the story consistent enough that nobody in it notices what they're standing on. So there was a caretaker all along, sitting in a van in a town that's been quietly deleting its own residents for a decade, doing nothing about any of it, waiting for the one specific emergency he actually cares about. Now the theory, and I'll be upfront that this one is barely formed because the material is new, and fans haven't finished chewing on it yet. The obvious reading is that he's some kind of author-adjacent figure, a representative of the people who make the show, embedded inside it. That's the most economical explanation, and it's probably right. But I want to put a slightly different one to you because I think it fits the evidence better. He doesn't behave like an author. He behaves like a maintenance contractor. Consider what he actually does. He doesn't create anything. He doesn't intervene when the town loses a resident. He didn't do a thing about Rob's decade of misery, and Rob's disfigurement, the glitching, the static panels, is caused by an object the Shady Man owns. A Rubik's Cube. It's been in his van this entire time. He had the cause of it in his possession and didn't hand it over. That's not an author. Authors are interested in their characters. This is somebody whose remit is narrowly defined and who does not exceed it. He acts precisely once, at precisely the moment when the whole structure is about to fail, because a structural failure is his problem, and a single character's suffering is not, which if you've ever dealt with a building management company, you'll recognise, and he doesn't fix it himself. He hires Rob. He takes the person with the most reason to hate the arrangement and puts him on the payroll, which is either extremely canny or extremely cynical, and possibly both. There's a detail in that episode that I think supports the contractor reading. When the two of them start rewriting the script, the Shady Man is careless about it. He doesn't try to stay within the logic of the world. He writes clumsy phrases that manifest literally, causes a shopping centre to chase two children around a town, and generally makes a mess that Rob has to work around. An author would care about the craft. This bloke doesn't. He's patching a hole, and the patch only has to hold. I find that far more unsettling than a benevolent creator figure. And I think the show does too, because it doesn't present him warmly. He's not a mentor. He's not a wise old guide. He's a man in a van who has known for years that everybody around him is fictional and has continued to sell them cursed merchandise. There's a question underneath this that I genuinely can't answer, and I've been turning it over since the episode landed. If he's known all along, what is he? Because the rule is clear. Anybody in Elmore who discovers the world, his fiction triggers the end of it. That's the mechanism, stated plainly, and it's the reason the whole episode exists. He knows, he's known for years, and nothing has happened. So either the rule has an exception for him, which means he isn't a resident in the way everyone else is, or the rule is about something subtler than knowledge, and what actually matters is who does the knowing. Rob knows too, and has for years, and Elmore's still here. So the rule probably isn't about awareness in general. It reads more like it's about the main characters specifically, which would put a fair amount of weight on one 12-year-old cat continuing to accept his own life, at face value. I don't think the show has settled that yet, and I'd be surprised if it ever states it outright. It tends to leave that sort of thing lying around. One small thing in the episode I keep noticing. The script the shopkeeper's holding is labelled G by 742, 742, the Wattersons' house number. Probably nothing. Somebody chose it though. Larry Needlemeyer is a rock. Specifically, he's a small grey boulder with a face, and he works at the convenience store, and the supermarket, and the cinema, and the fast food place, and the bank, the petrol station, the video shop, the pharmacy, the ice rink, and essentially every other commercial premises in Elmore. He is functionally the entire service industry of that town. The show plays this as a running gag, and it's a good one, because the joke gets funnier the more absurd the placement is. You go somewhere ridiculous, and Larry's behind the counter looking tired, but there's an in-universe explanation for it. And this is the part I find genuinely bleak once you sit with it. He's not working all those jobs at once. He's working them consecutively. He keeps getting fired, and he keeps getting fired because of Gumball and Darwin. That's established. The boys turn up, they cause a catastrophe, the establishment is damaged or humiliated or set on fire, and the employee who is present takes the consequences. The employee is always Larry, because Larry is always the employee. So the gag isn't that a rock has a lot of jobs. The gag is that a man's entire working life has been demolished, repeatedly, by two children who don't know his name. Now, the theory. There's a fairly popular reading that Larry is the only genuinely functional adult in Elmore, and that the reason he's everywhere is that he's the only person actually keeping the town's infrastructure running. Everyone else in that place is either a liability or a lunatic. Somebody has to open the shop. Somebody has to serve the food. And in a town this dysfunctional, that somebody ends up being one bloke doing all of it. I like that reading, but I think there's a more interesting one available, and it goes back to something we spent a fair amount of time on earlier tonight. Larry has a role. He has arguably more role than anyone in Elmore. He is defined entirely and exclusively by function. He is the person who works. And if you take seriously the idea that having a defined function is what keeps you in existence in this universe, then Larry is the most stable entity in the whole town. Not the most powerful, the most anchored. He could not be removed for irrelevance if the world tried, because the world would immediately notice its shops weren't open. Which means the safest possible way to exist in Elmore is to be so thoroughly, boringly useful that the system cannot afford to file you. And what does that get you? A working life defined by humiliation and dismissal at the hands of a boy who will never remember any of it. There's a stretch of the series where Larry snaps. I won't spoil the specifics for anyone who hasn't seen it, but there's an episode built around him having had enough, properly, comprehensively had enough, and the town discovering fairly quickly what happens when the person doing everything stops doing anything. It doesn't take long. Things fall apart almost immediately. And then it resets because everything in Elmore resets, and he's back behind a counter the following week. I've talked a lot tonight about characters who are trapped by the rules of this place. Rob was trapped by irrelevance, Arnace by her age, Carrie by 3 centuries, Nicole by a choice she made and would make again. Larry's the only one who's trapped by being necessary, and I'd argue that's the tightest bind in the town, because there's no version of the story where he gets released. The others might. There are futures where Rob finds peace and Gumball grows up, and the timeline unfreezes. There isn't one where the shop doesn't need opening. Larry has a partner, by the way, a relationship, a domestic life, an existence outside the counter. The show slips it in without comment, and then remembers it maybe 4 or 5 times in the whole run. So the joke and the man have been running alongside each other the entire way, and most of us only ever noticed the joke. Bobert is a robot in Gumball's class, and I want to close out with him, because he's the one character where the creepy fan theory is, I think, almost certainly just true. He's a small boxy robot with a screen for a face. He talks in a flat monotone. He has 2 robot parents, which the show presents without comment, and he attends school with everyone else. Most of his episodes are about him trying and failing to understand social behaviour, copying people, taking instructions literally, attempting friendship as an engineering problem. And he has a memory erase function. That's the bit. It's a button, it exists, it's been used, and the show treats it as a gag about robots being robots. The theory goes that Bobert isn't a pupil at all. He's an instrument. Somebody built him, put him in the most bewilderingly diverse classroom on the planet, and is collecting data on how an impossible mixture of species manages to coexist without the whole thing collapsing. And when the study period ends, the memory gets wiped and he gets placed somewhere else to start again. Under that reading, his entire personality, the copying, the literalism, the relentless attempts to understand how people work, isn't a comedy trait. It's the observation protocol. I find this one persuasive mostly because it requires you to invent almost nothing. The robot exists, the classroom exists, the erase button exists, and has been shown on screen. All the theory adds is a reason, and the reason it adds is the most obvious one available. What makes it land for me is the overlap with everything else we've talked about tonight. This is a show that repeatedly returns to the idea of something watching Elmore from outside and making decisions about it. The static that decides who's a mistake. The van that keeps the story consistent. Barbara's paintings arriving from somewhere nobody can trace. And a robot in a school desk with a button on his back. Whether those are all the same thing, I couldn't tell you. I suspect not. I suspect they're what happens when a lot of clever people spend a decade in a room asking the same underlying question in different ways. And the question is roughly, who's deciding what stays? Here's the detail that finishes it off for me. Bobert's most memorable episodes tend to involve him becoming briefly, alarmingly powerful. Capability far past anything a school project would need, appearing without warning and then never being mentioned again. Nobody in Elmore has ever asked what he's for. They've asked what the shell is for. They've asked occasionally what Rob wants. But the robot who sits among them with an unexplained capacity for enormous force and the ability to delete his own recollection of using it has never once had to explain himself. Which in a town this incurious is probably the safest place a listening device could possibly sit. So that's 21, and I've been at this long enough that I've slightly lost track of what time it is. I said at the start that the strange thing about Gumball theories is how few of them anyone had to invent, and I'd stand by that after going through the lot. The static is real, the deletion is real, the rule about awareness is real, stated on screen by a character holding a script with a house number on the cover. The fan stuff, the culls, the survival strategies, the shells, the reading of Nicole is stitched into gaps the show left open on purpose, which is unusual. Most shows that get this treatment are being read against themselves. This one meets you halfway and then keeps walking. I don't have a grand conclusion for you, and I don't think one would be honest. There's no single theory underneath all of it, no key that turns and makes 21 things into one thing. Some of it is a writer's room, following a good idea downhill for a decade. Some of it is a man who built a show out of parts nobody wanted and never quite let go of that. And some of it is just what happens when you make that many episodes of anything. You accumulate a strange amount of meaning, whether you meant to or not. 2 more seasons are on the way, so there'll be more of it, and presumably more theories, and at some point somebody's going to have to explain the Rubik's Cube. I've got a few other things I've been picking at for future videos. There's a whole thing about Mr. Small that I kept nearly getting into tonight and had to keep pulling myself out of, because the man is treated as a joke by everyone in that town and has been right about roughly everything. That's probably its own video. Thanks for hanging around this long. Sleep well.